So, dear students, today our topic is about human physiology, in which we start the human digestive system, their structure and functions. So, firstly, we define the human digestive system. Basically, this is the digestive system, the process of reducing the food into smaller molecule that can be absorbed into the body, right? So the digestive systems can be categorized into two major parts. The one is the major organs. So the major organs include the mouth, esophagus, stomach, small intestine and the large intestine, while the accessory organs can be divided into the liver, gallbladder and pancreas. So now we will discuss what are these organs and how we categorize these two parts. So in the human digestive system, the major and accessory organs can be defined at its start from the mouth, then esophagus, then gallbladder, pancreas, large intestine that end with the colon, appendix, rectums, anus, and on the left side there will be the salivary glands, right? Parrots, scamal intestine, cecum, and appendix. So this diagram show the two major organs of the human digestive system. So now we start with the major organ. So the major organ we categorize by the in the mouth. For example, how we can define the mouth? Basically, the pH of the mouth is always 7. This is the first part of the digestive system where we enter the food. Now we discuss what are the structure in the mouth that aid the digestion. The first structures that we call the teeth. The function of the teeth is it cut, tear, crush and grind the food in our mouth. So the mouth also includes some of the salivary glands. So how we can define the function of the salivary glands? It basically produce and secrete the saliva into the oral cavity, right? So inside the mouth there is again another organs which we call the saliva. It basically moisture the food. So the saliva contains some of the enzymes which we call the ptyalin or salivary amylase. The function of these enzymes are that they begin the digestions of the starch into smaller polysaccharides. For example, if we eat some glucose or carbohydrates related food, so ptyalin and salivary amylase begin digestion of the starch into the smaller polysaccharides. So what are the function of the mouth? Basically, it help in the mechanical digestion in the digestive system. The first event which start the mechanical digestion that are inside the mouth. It also increased surface area for faster chemical digestion. For example, if we want the chemical process increase, so first digestion of the food will be occur in the mouth. So this is the general label diagram of the human mouth. The teeth which help as a mechanical digestion, saliva which secretes some salivary glands, for example, ptyalin and the salivary amylase which help the glucose to break down into the smaller polysaccharides. The second organ in the digestive system is the esophagus. After the mouth, the food will be entered into the digestion into the esophagus tube. Basically, it is the tube which connecting the mouth to the stomach. Right? It is running through the thoracic cavity. So now we discussed what are the location of the esophagus. Basically, it's lie behind the windpipe, which we call the trachea. Windpipe where the air will be passed through. So behind that, the esophagus tube will be present. So the trachea has an epiglottis. For example, the trachea surface contains some of the part which we call the epiglottis. So what is the function of the epiglottis? It prevents food from entering the windpipes, right, and moving the food to the esophagus while swallowing. When we swallowing, so it help in the movement of the food toward the esophagus and not toward the windpipe with the help of the epiglottis. So this is the general diagram of the epiglottis, which prevent the food to enter into the windpipe, and now the food will be entered toward the esophagus tube. So there is the general mechanisms during the traveling of the food in the esophagus tube, which we call the peristalsis. So how we can define the peristalsis? It is basically the food travel down the esophagus through a series of the involuntary rhythmic contractions, which we call the wave-like activity, and this is defined as the peristalsis. So the function of this is that the lining of the esophagus secretes some mucus lubricating to support the movement of the food. For example, for the movement of the food, there is some secretion of the mucus which create the lubrication to pass down this food toward the esophagus tube. So this diagram shows that in the digestive tract, some esophagus secretion will be occur by the mucus, and it will transfer or travel the bolus and the chyme toward the stomach. So this we call them as a peristalsis. After that, the food will be entered and passed through the one of the most important part in the stomach, which we call the esophageal sphincter. So this we can define that when the bolus reach the stomach, it passed through a muscular ring valves, right? There is some muscular ring valves are present from the start of the stomach, which we call the esophageal sphincter. Another name is also is the cardiac sphincter. So what is the function of the esophageal sphincter? It basically prevents stomach acid from back following into the esophagus, because it help to pass down the acids from back toward the esophagus. That's why the esophageal sphincter that we call the cardiac sphincter prevent it to pass back toward the esophagus tube. So after the entering from the esophagus sphincter, so this is the general diagram of the esophagus sphincter. Here you can see that there is the ring-like sphincter, which we call the cardiac sphincter, is present here. When the food or bolus have been entered, it will be shrink and prevent back of the food or acids toward the esophageal tubes. After that, now the food is entered toward the stomach. So how we can define the stomach? The stomach is the J-shaped muscular sac, and it has inner folds. So the inner fold of the stomach, which we call the rugs, it increase the surface area of the stomach according to the food. So according to the food, the stomach surface area will be increased. So what is the function of the stomach? So the stomach perform mechanical digestion. And how it will done the mechanical digestion? By churning the bolus and mixing it with the gastric juices. For example, by secreting some of the juices, it will churning the bolus. When it bolus enter in the stomach, so it will secrete some gastric juices. So now we discuss what are the gastric juices that will be secreted. The first gastric juices, which is the hydrochloric acid, salt, enzymes, water, and mucus. So what is the function of hydrochloric acid? It basically helps to break down of food and kills bacteria that came along with the food, right? So it break down the food and help along the bacteria, right? So the bolus is now called the chyme. When the churning of the bolus will be mixed by the gastric juices, so now this bolus we call them as the chyme. So this is the general diagram of the stomach, which start from the gastric juices. The J-shaped stomach contains some of the gastric juices in the form of the hydrochloric acids, which convert the bolus into the chyme. So now the question is, what are the enzymes present in the stomach? So stomach always will be in acidic environment due to the hydrochloric acid secretion. Basically, hydrochloric acid kill any microbes that are found in the bolus, and it's create the pH down to the 2. For example, when the pH will be 2, it create the acidic environment, all the microbes will be killed down. It also contains some of the mucus which prevent the stomach from the digestive itself. Second gastric juice which is present in the stomach or enzyme, which we call the pepsin secretion. Basically, this secretion responsible for initiating the breakdown of food, protein foods, right? How it will be done? It hydrolyzes the protein to yield the polypeptides. For example, with the help of the pepsin, some of the protein will be hydrolyzed to convert into the long chain of the polypeptides. The pH is always 2, And this enzymes from the salivary gland stops breaking down the carbohydrates, right? So it's always responsible to break down the protein when we intake some protein nutrients or protein products, so the pepsin secretion will be activated. So this is the general lumen of the stomach, which consists of the chief cells and the partial cells. The chief cells consist of some of the pepsinogen secretion activity, and the partial cells contain some of the HCl secretion activity. So both these events will be occur side by side, and the lumen of the stomach consists of the some enzymatic activity. So now the third part in the stomach is the closing of the stomach, which we call the pyloric sphincter. After the digestion of the food in the stomach, so the pyloric sphincter, the chyme move from the stomach to the small intestine. It passed through a muscular ring sphincters called the pyloric sphincter. So in this picture, you can easily identify that the pyloric sphincter is present in the end of the stomach, where the food will be entered toward the small intestinal start part, which we call the duodenum, and now the food or chyme will be passed down toward the duodenum. So this is the general diagram of the pyloric sphincter, where you can see that it's open down, and all the bolus or the chyme will be entered toward the small intestine with the help of the opening of the pyloric sphincter. So in the last, there is some interesting question which will discuss that stomach does not digest itself and why. So there is the answer toward this question, that there is a protective mechanism present in the stomach. There are three protective mechanisms which prevent the stomach to be digest itself. The first mechanism is that first the stomach only secretes the small amount of gastric juices until food is present. When the food is present, it only secretes the gastric juices, and when the food secrete down toward the intestine, so it stops the release of the gastric juices. That's why the stomach does not digest itself. Second, the secretion of the mucus coat the lining of the stomach, protecting it from the gastric juices. For example, the stomach contains some of the lining which protect itself by digesting by the gastric juices. And the third and the most interesting answer to this question is that the digestive enzyme pepsin is secreted in an inactive protein called the pepsinogen. So pepsinogen is converted to pepsin in the increased presence of the hydrochloric acid. If the hydrochloric is present in the high amount, then the pepsinogen will convert into pepsin. Otherwise, it is present in inactive form. That's why the three reasons make the stomach to prevent itself from by the digestive system or the gastric juices. So these are all about the anatomy of the stomach, the different parts of the stomach, how it works to digest the food with the help of some enzyme. We explain it with the diagrammatic labeled diagrams. And now we solve down the interesting question, which is the stomach does not digest itself and why. So this is all about the human digestive system. Thank you so much.